Thank you, everybody, and I appreciate you taking the time on Monday morning, your time, if you're in the UK, to listen in on this call and to listen in on Blencowe Resources. Thanks to Sasha for setting it up, and we're going to go through the presentation. I'm not going to follow it step by step, but I'm going to refer to it along the way, and I'm going to break the call into three separate parts. Firstly, to talk about the electric vehicle market, the association of graphite into that market and what it means for us and the forecasts going forward. Once I finish that, I think I'll break, ask if there's any questions, take some Q&A, and then we'll go in and talk about Blencowe's Orom-Cross project. And again, once I've spoken about that, we can break, take a few questions, and then I'll talk about the program of work going forward, the news flow, and we can finish with some Q&A there. So three separate parts. If that works for everybody, just feel free to break in and let's have some Q&A at the end of it to make it as interactive as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to be sitting here staring at a computer for the next 45 minutes. Can you take us to the first slide, please, Sasha?
Sure, Mike.
Okay, so next slide, Don. Beyond the disclaimer. Okay, this is what's going on in the electric vehicle market at the moment. I think you'd have to be living under a rock to not be aware of the trends and the fast growth that's happening in this particular sector at the moment. There is an incredible amount of media all over the world that is coming into this particular space. And I think it's driven by the fact that this is seen as one of the fastest growing trends worldwide. Roughly December 2019, so that's roughly a year ago from today, there are 7.5 million EVs in the world, of which about half of those are in China and the rest in Europe and USA. And the market is moving at such pace that the forecasts as provided by Benchmark Minerals Intelligence, who are one of the leading experts in this particular area, predict that there will be somewhere between 140 million as a low-range forecast and 600 million as a high-range forecast by 2030. So in the next 10 years, we're going to be moving somewhere between a 20 times growth to an 80 times growth in this particular space. And that's quite incredible. I think the thing which is also significant is that the world doesn't just stop in 2030. If one looks at the forecasts, they are along that sort of hockey stick growth. And so they're going to continue to rise very quickly at that point as well. So I think there's an enormous trend that's going on, and the drivers for that growth are down there on the bottom of the screen, where you've got a number of different things happening in this particular space. I think the most important one is that the average EV cost has come down quite considerably. I think whereas before Tesla were selling its cheapest model for about $100,000 US. Tesla have now moved their M3 down to $35,000, and there are other cars in the market around about that $30,000 to $40,000 mark. So and that's driven also by the fact that the cost of batteries is coming down quite considerably as well. So reduction in cost is definitely bringing it into a different market. At the same time, there's been a lot of technological development, both in terms of the vehicles and the energy storage and the batteries. So this is where we're going to continue to see change going forward. There's definitely a lot of technology, and one of the main reasons why Tesla has leapfrogged all the other car manufacturers to become the largest by market cap in the car space is that it has such a leading position in terms of technological development, in terms of, in particular, its batteries and its energy storage, and the market's seeing it as being a leader going forward. Increase in number of charging stations is one that I think you people in the UK are going to see a lot of change going forward. Obviously, there's talk of no petrol or diesel cars being sold beyond 2030 as stimulus packages come into place. And there's a drive in this particular EV market. You're going to see a lot of charging stations going up everywhere. But quite simply, one can get a charging pack put into your own garage if you happen to have one, and you can charge your car overnight, typically about 7.5 hours to recharge it, so that you can do somewhere around about 300 kilometers of driving the next day. So there is an increasing number of stations everywhere, and that will grow as the market starts to embrace this particular change. Yes, definitely the first move advantage of Tesla, we've talked about it. China has got the biggest market share, but suddenly we're seeing a lot of growth in Europe, in particular some of the car manufacturers in Europe starting to form very strong strategic alliances with battery manufacturers, and that's starting to bring them into the space a lot more openly and actively than they were before. And the auto manufacturers moving upstream is going to continue, because they can't just sit with the complete reliance on China in order to provide them with literally 100% of the anode for the lithium-ion battery, which is what is taking place in the past. On the other side, in terms of the macro market, we're obviously continuing to see global warming. There's a great drive towards environmental awareness and the move to renewables from fossil fuels, and that will obviously continue. And through the politics and through the economics, we're seeing a macro market shift towards this. Stimulus spending I talked about before, but in general, there's a lot of talk about governments all over the world spending a lot of that stimulus money into renewable energy, into this renewable space, and EVs is going to be a big winner, I suppose, in terms of that particular move going forward. Governments are supporting it. It's definitely high on the agenda. And there is definitely a generational transition. The younger generations are starting to move towards this, and the market demand is growing. And over the last 1 to 2 months, we've seen the Biden victory in the US election creating another big catalyst in this particular space, because Biden is very pro renewables and pro green, and has taken America straight back into the Paris Accord. So these are the drivers. It's very, very difficult to say with any accuracy what the forecast growths are going to be, but I think it's fair to say that anywhere between 100 and 600 million cars in 10 years' time is going to see quite a significant change from where we are today. And that's going to have a very significant change in terms of batteries and through that into graphite. Next slide, please, Sasha. So this is where we talk about graphite and the leverage that it has to this phenomenal EV growth. At the moment, we're seeing about 1.5 million tons of flake graphite demand in the world today. And as this growth in particular in the EVs, it's not to say that flake graphite is only used for electric vehicles. There is a considerable amount used for other means and other uses at the moment, approximately 1 million tons per annum. But the large growth in demand is going to come from the EV market and through the batteries. You can see some of the quotes there on the right-hand side. Elon Musk basically saying that he believes that the battery should be called or refer to the graphite instead, nickel graphite, because primarily the cathode is nickel and the anode is graphite. And I think it's fair to say that graphite making up about 50% of the anode is the significant material used for the lithium-ion battery in terms of weight, and approximately 45 to 50 kgs per battery is made up of graphite. Some of them, Tesla's using about 70 to 80 kilograms. So if you start to extrapolate the kind of numbers that we're talking about in terms of vehicles, and you start to understand within each of those vehicles there's going to be a lithium-ion battery, and about half of that weight of that battery is going to be graphite. So there is growth coming, and growth happening as we speak. And I think we're going to see a quantum shift in terms of where this graphite market goes going forward, primarily driven by the leverage to the EV growth. But there are, as I say, other uses, and they are continuing to grow. The larger flake sizes are used in the expandables market, and particularly in terms of steel production. And that market is growing around about 10% per annum, according to Benchmark Minerals. So there is likely to be continued growth across the board, but not in the same sort of exponential manner that we're seeing it in the lithium-ion batteries. And it's not just any old flake graphite that's going to be used in these batteries. It has to be sphericalized, which means that they squeeze the energy content into a very small spherical shaped pod that can be used within the battery. It requires a very pure type of flake graphite, and it needs to be concentrated to a 99% purity. So when you hear that there are many, many graphite projects all over the world that can provide graphite going forward and therefore be able to supply into this demand, that's not necessarily true, because it's going to require a particular quality of graphite in order to deliver into this particular market. So that in itself will play a role in terms of what graphite projects are seen as the winners going forward. And when one's considering graphite projects and considering which companies to follow, definitely understanding the quality of the graphite that they've got, and also the flake sizes, of course, is going to be key in terms of understanding whether it will be leveraged into this growth going forward. Blencowe, ourselves, we own 100% of one of the largest high-quality graphite projects in the world, in what we consider to be a very safe location in Uganda. And I think because of that, we are very highly leveraged into this EV growth going forward. Next slide, please. The graphite supply deficit, this is a graph that's been provided by Benchmark Minerals Intelligence. I think it's very, very telling. BMI spend a lot of time going around the world looking at existing projects that are in production today. And then they start to add in highly probable tons, less probable tons, possible tons, and they build what is that Manhattan down below on the bottom of that graph of where the supply is going to come from going forward, or likely supply is going to come from going forward. And you can see where we sit in 2020 that demand, which is that green line, is met in totality by the supply, and that's okay where we sit today, and that's why we're seeing graphite prices quite low in terms of where they've been recently. But as you start seeing this growth in demand coming over the next 3 to 5 years and starting to really accentuate as it goes beyond 2030, you're starting to see a huge gap start to open up between demand and supply. And I think that it doesn't take a lot of imagination to believe that there's going to be quite significant price increases if demand is going to exceed supply in this manner going forward. We at Blencowe are considering, or certainly targeting, to bring our first production in at Orom-Cross around about 2024, 2025 year. And that there you can see on the graph that coincides quite nicely where the shortfall is starting to occur, and hopefully prices will start to really lift as a result of that. Just as an aside, I've been following some of the BMI price forecasts, and certainly the current pricing is showing that over the last 1 to 2 months there's been a $50 per ton kick in the price of minus 100 mesh graphite, which is what's used in terms of the EV batteries, and that's about a 10% rise that's occurred over the last 1 to 2 months. So we're starting to see effects of demand, supply, and price increases happening already, and we're still back in 2020 on that graph, and we haven't really got into where it's going to get exciting going on. So that shows us why we think that graphite is something in terms of going forward, and I believe it's going to be a real it's going to be something very exciting, certainly as we go into the latter half of this decade. Next slide. And this particular slide talks about market prices. It's quite difficult getting up-to-date prices for graphite because everybody's selling it on their own contracts, and so there's no open market where everybody's showing what they're getting. But again, through BMI, we managed to get some information on prices, so it's relatively up to date. It's normally a quarter late, but you can see from there that there's quite significant price changes or differences between the smaller flakes going right up through to the jumbo flakes, and you can talk between 500 to 600 at the lower end, right up towards $2,000 per ton at the higher end, at the larger flake size, and for a higher concentration. And that's significant for us in terms of Orom-Cross. We're very lucky that we have about 75% of our natural graphite occurring in situ at the jumbo, extra large, and large flake sizes, which means that the process of concentrating it up to a 97%, which is what we're targeting in our current MET test work, you cannot get a bigger flake from a smaller one. You can certainly destroy a large flake and make it smaller in that process. So it's a very detailed process to get to that high concentration. But one thing for sure, it makes a lot of, it certainly is an advantage to have a larger flake size in situ, and then to look to preserve as much of that as you can going through to the end product. We're expecting, or certainly targeting, around 40 to 50% of our end product to be in that 95 to 97% concentrate as a jumbo, extra large, or large flake size. So what that means is that approximately half of our end product is going to sell at the higher cost, or at the higher prices. Whilst it may seem lower pricing on the smaller flakes, they're at the -100 mesh. That's where it's starting to show, as I say, a 10% increase in the last 1 to 2 months. So we could easily see that driving up quite quickly going forward. But it's good to have a mix of both and selling into two completely different markets. As I said before, the larger flake sizes will sell into the expandables market, steel production, fire retardants, and the smaller flakes will be able to get sphericalized and go into the EV market in terms of lithium-ion batteries. I think, just go one slide if you would more, Sasha. I'll just see, I think that's probably where I wanted to stop for now. Okay, this is what I was talking about in terms of the applications for different flake sizes. There are about 100 to 200 different things that graphite is used for, ranging from lead pencils, which people are well aware of, right through the lithium-ion batteries. On the left, there's the jumbo large, which is used because of its properties in terms of being very heat resistant. It's used as a flame retardant, thermal sheets, etc. So there is an awful big market in terms of finding where your end users are going to be. And as part of this next phase, when we're going through into the studies, we're going to be going out with our end product and talking to various different parties to understand who would like to buy our product, and obviously starting to get involved with preliminary offtake agreements. But that gives you some idea of what graphite is used for. Just take me down one more slide. I think we'll probably leave it there and just see if there are any questions before we go into the corporate overview. The next slide here is the corporate overview. This is where Blencowe sits at the moment. One of our strategies in terms of setting up this company and bringing this project in was to try and find an asset that was counter-cyclical, which means that we're trying to find something that we believe is going to be red hot in the future, but it's not necessarily red hot when we bought it. And you'll appreciate that even though we announced this project in April last year and brought it into the company, we had started doing due diligence about a year before. So approximately 2 years ago, we were offered this project in Uganda. We think it's a standout, and we negotiated the price, set up the company in London, and brought it in together with cash. We spent a lot of that initial cash that we raised in terms of the work that we've done so far, in particular the drilling program that we did last year. And we raised another £500,000 in the last month in order to take us forward in terms of going forward into 2021. So it's a very tight structure. I think that one of our strategies in terms of the corporate structure is to keep it lean, to keep it very low cost. Nobody is on full salaries. We work on approximately 20-25% of what anybody else would consider to be a full-time salary for their staff, and mainly because we're all very motivated and incentivized by shares and options and warrants that we've got from participating in this. But As example, I certainly participated, as did members of the board, in the last capital raise that was done. So we've also put our hands in our pockets to buy shares, and we continue to be very positive about not only the market, which I've talked about in the last few minutes, but certainly in terms of the company and where we're taking it going forward. So that's the company. We're sitting on a market cap at 8p, around about £9 million. Most of that is enterprise value. And there are some, interestingly out there's some warrants that are very much in the money, which is a good thing because it gives us access to another couple of £1 million worth of cash over the course of this year as people start to cash in the warrants. We're starting to see some of that already. And we're quite a liquid stock, so we are able to absorb some of that selling if people do cash in their warrants in order to sell and move on. So I think we're in good position. We certainly don't want to blow this capital structure out too much. But I think when you consider the likes of Tirupati, who listed last year, they are, of course, a little bit further ahead of us. That they're in production, but I think they've listed, if I'm not mistaken, anyway, correct me, but it was about £70 million, and they've probably double that now. So there's quite a long way for us to go over the next medium term as we develop the company through the various milestones towards that production going forward. So can you take us to the next slide? I think that's enough on where we are. Just a little bit on who we are. Cameron Pearce, our chairman, has set up and managed the early stage growth of several junior resource companies in London, both on AIM and a standard listing, together with Sam Quinn, who's another one of our directors. So they've both got plenty of experience, not just in terms of the corporate side, but in terms of identifying projects and helping to manage the growth going forward. Alex Passmore, our director, he's actually based here in Australia. Alex is a very experienced and capable geologist, and that's very useful when you're in the exploration phase of your project. And he's definitely of help to us as we go forward. As I said, we haven't got a very big, costly management team, so it's very important that we lean on all the skill set that we've got on the board. My own experience has been, I say 15 years over there, but it's probably more like 17 or 18 years in the junior resource business, mainly here in Australia, although I've done a few projects over in the UK as well. I've been involved in all different types of projects, including gold, coal, base metals. And my particular sort of experience is bringing things through from a very early stage towards first production. And that's what I've done quite successfully in a couple of cases. So we know what we've got to do. We've got the experience, and we've just got to get our work done and continue to provide value and continue to add value to the company and to the project as we go forward. Next slide. In particular, the guys that really matter, we've managed to get ourselves a very capable COO, Ian Waring. Ian is a mining engineer that has considerable experience in terms of developing projects through this feasibility stage and into production. And in particular, he's done it in a lot of African mines and projects. So he has relevant experience, and that's very good for us. And I think he brings that technical expertise to the team in terms of leading and driving the feasibility studies going forward. And he's going to be of considerable value to us, as has Oscar van Antwerpen, who's the leader or the founder of our technical partner. And they're called Minrom Consulting. And Oscar's had an enormous amount of experience in this particular project because he's been involved not just with us, but through the prior owners as well. So he's been literally driving the exploration and drilling programs there for the last 5 to 6 years. And that experience is critical. So we've got good technical experience, not just those two, but they're sort of the more prominent faces. And then we've got obviously people working with them and underneath them and using third-party consultants where necessary. Next slide. Okay, so the project itself, Orom-Cross is about somewhere between 2 to 3 billion tons, I beg your pardon, of graphite sitting in northeast Uganda. Uganda is a landlocked country in East Africa. I know it very well. I used to live in Kenya myself for 6 years before I moved to Australia. You can hear from my accent that I'm actually originally from Zimbabwe. So I know Africa very well. And in particular, I really do like East Africa. I don't know, maybe it's got that British heritage, and things tend to work just a little bit better. There tend to be better mining laws, and things just seem to be a little bit easier to manage and to handle in these places that are former British colonies. And Uganda, for me, is one of the best places of all. I know you would have seen a fair bit of news over the last couple of weeks in terms of their election. President Museveni has been in power there since 1986. So he's managed a transitionary phase in the country's history and done it, I think, very successfully. Uganda was in a lot of trouble when he took over, and has become one of the stronger regional players going forward. And they've got a very powerful message in terms of trying to promote their mining agenda going forward. So Orom-Cross is located in a good position. One can access it via a central road that runs all out from Kampala up towards Kitgum on the road to South Sudan, and then just veer across there. Through all the rivers that you can see there, this is actually the source of the Nile down there in Lake Victoria, and it flows through. So there's an enormous amount of water available all through the country, and through that they've got a big hydroelectric power program going forward, and electricity will become relatively cheap going forward when we're in production phase. So I think in terms of water and power, two of the biggest key components to infrastructure, we're in safe hands. The road system's okay. We've got tarred roads all the way through to Kitgum, and approximately the last 100 kilometers towards Orom-Cross is dirt at the moment, but we have assurances from the government that they will be putting in a tarred road before we're in production. So we'll see. We've got to continue to lobby for that, but we have ourselves an enormous graphite project that we will only ever be able to tap into a very, very small percentage of, no matter what sort of production profile that we get into, because there's just so much graphite there. And the beauty of it is that it's sitting relatively close to the surface. There is actually graphite presenting at surface, quite a lot of it, but literally as you go down through the saprolite in about the first 5 to 15 meters, and then you start getting into the harder rock down below that, there's plenty of graphite available. So we're expecting to have a shallow open pit deposit for mining, which is very important because I think it's going to give us a low strip ratio with free digging. There's not going to be explosives required, and it all drives towards a very low operating cost. And that's critical because at the end of the day, we intend to become one of the lowest cost producers of graphite going forward. We will put a plant at site that will upgrade it to the 95-97% concentrate, and we'll move it via road at first. But ultimately, there's going to be a standard gauge rail line that runs all the way through from Mombasa Port in Kenya to Kampala, and ultimately over the majority of life of mine of this project, it would be moved via rail and then taken away to wherever it may be in Europe, China, etc., in terms of a concentrate. So it's the logistics are good, and we've already spoken to some logistical companies in country about the cost and the ability to move that product, and we don't see any concerns there. It contains in situ a large component, as I said, of large flake jumbo, and that's very, very important. When I was talking about prices before, I think that one wants to get a good measure or mixture of different flake sizes in terms of not putting all the eggs in one basket, but it's also critical in terms of getting a weighted average selling price that can achieve a decent margin. If we were to go back to that slide where I was talking about the different prices for product, you will see that if we were to get approximately half of it sold as large, extra large or jumbo flake, and then the other half sold as a -100 mesh, smaller flake into the EV market, we're probably looking around about $1,000 at today's prices in terms of a weighted average, and we'd be seeking to try and get product to Mombasa Port for about $350 per ton. So there's a healthy margin. we've obviously got to put all of that into our studies going forward and get third parties to sign off on all of it so that we can show that this margin is really there. But in terms of our own preliminary estimates, that's the kind of numbers we're looking at. And it's all about where we take it going forward. There's a great project here to develop. There's obviously a few challenges at the moment in terms of travel, but we have got a good team in country and we're leveraging off that quite significantly, and they're getting a lot of work done as well. We've managed to get samples up when we were drilling last year. So we've got met test work that's going on in Canada. We've got assays going on in South Africa to deliver the JORC. So even though we're not being able to get there in person, the people who are in country together with our consultants and friends all over are working very hard to ensure that we keep the work program moving forward as quickly as we can. Next slide, please. So these are some of the milestones that we've achieved and we're moving towards. As I say, we did the RTO less than a year ago, just about 9 months ago as we speak. And we literally took the cash that we raised in that listing and we started a 2,000 meter diamond drilling program on site in order to ultimately achieve a JORC resource as quickly as possible. That has all been completed and all the samples have been taken through labs or accredited labs in Tanzania, and the samples, as I said before, are in South Africa and in Canada, where they're going to undergo test work in terms of met test work for phase 2 and in terms of maiden JORC resource. So there's some big milestones going forward, plenty of news flow. We think that one of the key advantages to this project is that we're going to have constant news flow coming through at all times. And it'll be very exciting as we get into this economic assessment and study phase, because we're going to have a lot of things happening and a lot to say about it all going forward. So quite an exciting year in terms of progress and in terms of news flow. Sasha, next slide, please. This is where we go in terms of 2021. Our consultants in South Africa are busy working through the assays there. You'll start to see some results coming through for those assays in the very near term, because we're going to start getting the assays complete, and we will publish those results to the market to show how exciting this is. As an example, we went out there to drill what we considered to be a 7-8% in situ product in terms of in the ground, and we found while we were out there drilling that we had a high grade load, which we're calling the camp load, literally sitting right next door, which is somewhere around about 12 to 15% graphite. So we immediately put some holes into that, and of course, being the higher grade, we've gotten those assays done first in South Africa, and as I said a moment ago, we're going to be starting to publish some results for that coming forward. And we're pretty excited about what we're seeing there. The most important thing really is to get ourselves a JORC resource that targets around 8 to 10 million tons. On preliminary numbers, we're thinking we might start at about 25, 30,000 tons per annum of production. And if you do the maths working backwards, that works out to be about 8 to 10 million tons of JORC resource that we're going to require in order for that first 10 years of mine life. But we can put some more holes in there and double that very quickly, very effectively and efficiently. So the issue here is just how much the market will absorb in terms of selling. And as I say on the left-hand side of that slide, even 8 to 10 million tons represents, I say less than 1%, it's probably less than half of 1% of the total deposit. So there is plenty more graphite out there for us to go and drill and use and mine and process going forward as we start to develop into what our market looks like and where we can sell it. And that's all about the met test work in terms of phase 2. As I showed previously, it's all about upgrading graphite into a product that can be used for various different applications. And one needs to be producing anything above 94, 95% as a minimum in terms of concentrate. We're going to be looking around 96, 97% if we can get there. But also it needs to have low impurities. thorium, vanadium, ash, sulfur. High recoveries, of course, because the higher the recovery, the more graphite we're going to get out of the plant. And we would like to ensure that the majority of jumbo, extra large and large flakes are maintained within that concentrate. Yes, that expandables market is a lower growth percentage than the EV market at the moment, but it's still providing more than double in terms of the prices that you can get for it. So it's all about getting that mix of both the larger flake size and the smaller ones. So we're going into the study phase. Once we get all this work done in terms of JORC resource and met test work, we're going to be doing some preliminary studies, internal studies, and ultimately moving forward into a scoping study and a PFS. And we want to complete the PFS by the end of this year. So we want to have a phased approach to different studies and different assessments coming through at all times. Well, not at all times, but certainly over the next couple of quarters, so that there's a constant viewing of what's happening out there and where we can get and where we're seeing progress in the project. Next slide. Okay, the rest of that is just appendix, and there's some very interesting sort of quotes, etc. I think one of the ones that I like the most, and I just did a little bit of sort of digging around just to try and give a bit of flavour here. When we first started looking at this project 2 years ago, there were 45 mega factories in production and in the phase of being produced. A year ago, that moved up to 71. Now we're seeing there are 170 gigafactories up or underway at the moment. So gigafactories or mega factories are huge investments, literally multi-billion-dollar investments by battery manufacturers and vehicle manufacturers in terms of not just Tesla. They've got that giant gigafactory in Nevada, but everyone, in particular China. Most of those are in China, so they are the drivers of the space at the moment. But just to put it in context, because these kind of words, gigafactories, come out and nobody really understands what it means. The Tesla gigafactory in Nevada that's about to open will produce 500,000 batteries per annum. And that means that there will be approximately 30 to 35,000 tons of sphericalized graphite being used in that factory on an annual basis. And you have about a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of moving flake graphite into a sphericalized form. So that one Tesla gigafactory in Nevada is going to suck up about 100,000 tons of flake graphite on its own per annum. Now, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, 18 months ago, that was the entire flake graphite production for a year. So one gigafactory is going to be taking what was the entire world demand. And as I say, there are 170 factories, mega factories and gigafactories, either not all in production, certainly most of them are in the phase of coming through into production going forward, but this is the space where there's a lot going on at the moment. So, and the other thing which is very interesting, I suppose, is supply side. There are 0 graphite producers in the United States today. It's considered critical. There's definitely a lot of talk about it, not just because of Tesla, but because it's considered as such a vital part of the makeup of the new technologies going forward. China is the largest supplier of graphite in the world, about 55% today, but that's starting to change. And Africa in particular is one of those locations where there's considerable amount of graphite coming forward. But it's a very interesting one because Africa is made up of higher risk locations, lower risk locations. Places like Mozambique, where Sahara Resources have their huge graphite project, are certainly, in my opinion, considered higher risk. And you know, there are a number of different factors, from natural factors such as weather, right through to insurgents and jihadists and other issues that may cause supply chains to be disrupted. One of the key factors that we think will play into our hands being a producer in Uganda is that we'll be able to talk to manufacturers and talk to any party that wants to buy our buy our product and talk about it being in a very safe location that has not seen any conflicts for the last 40 years. So we think that there's a massive market going forward. There's an enormous amount of growth. We leveraged into that, and we'll be able to show that in terms of our progress going forward as we develop the project in the next 12 months and thereafter as we move towards production. So I think I'll stop there. Again, open up the floor to any questions that you may have, and hopefully the message is been passed across, and maybe if you guys want to have some interaction, that'd be nice.
Hi, Mike. I have a question from Jason Robertson from First Equity. He's asking at what point would the company start to enter into offtake discussions, and whether you've already been approached by any potential end users for your graphite.
The answer is no, Jason. And the reason for that is nobody's going to approach us until they know what our product looks like. And we don't know what our product looks like at the moment, so obviously very difficult to go out there and start finding buyers. We've got to understand not just what the product looks like. As I said before, we're going to end up with different types of product. We're going to end up with large flake, and we're going to end up with small flake product, and we are seeing it as being two different chains within the processing plant in terms of delivering a smaller mesh product and a large flake product. Once we know that, and I guess the answer is once our MET test results come back from Canada in the next quarter, then we will have, hopefully we'll have a full process flow through what we've obviously got to build a plant to manufacture, and we'll know what that end product looks like in terms of the quality, in terms of flake sizes, in terms of the concentrate, in terms of impurities and everything else that matters. Once we've got that information, we'll be going out there. Again, not quite as easy as it was when people jumped in airplanes and went off to trade shows and started waving an end product around, but that doesn't necessarily mean the world stops. I think just what we're doing today shows that we will get on and do our work regardless, and we will be engaging with experts. We've definitely identified some of these experts in terms of who we need to talk to help find where the end market users are going to come from. So I think that will probably start in the second half of this year, and as soon as we know our product. Does that answer it?
Jason, Jason, I think you can unmute yourself if you wanted to.
That's fine. Yeah, that's thank you. That's useful answer. Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
thank
good.
you, Jason. Okay, next question from Paul Glover. Do you think there's any threat of silicon being used instead of graphite in the future?
Yes, well, it's a very interesting one, the silicon. So again, when I was doing a little bit of work before this call to try and understand, because I felt that question was going to come, the key factors that matter in terms of developing a battery is not just the cost of it, which I talked about before, but it's trying to find the ratio of how much power can be put out there and what the weight of that is, and obviously the safety measures that go with that. So silicon has an energy density around about 5 times that of graphite. So on the face of it, silicon is definitely something that could or should be used in terms of the anode, in terms of producing more power for that battery. However, when silicon is absorbed into the lithium-ion battery, it swells about 4 times, which starts to create some problems in terms of the safety, in terms of everything from fire and everything else. So what they do at the moment is that the silicon is, they call it peppered into the graphite, so that there is some silicon within the graphite that's used in the anode. And that gives it a little bit more energy density in terms of power, but you're not seeing silicon used on its own at this stage because of some of the properties I've just talked about. That's not to say that it can't be used going forward. This is a space which is obviously changing technically quite quickly. There's a lot of very clever people all over the world that are working on this everywhere in terms of trying to find the most efficient, and that's in terms of power to weight to cost to safety ratio, But for now, the leading analysts, Benchmark Minerals, etc., are all talking about graphite being the mineral that is used in terms of the lithium-ion battery in the anode going forward for the next decade anyway. We don't know what's going to happen beyond that. It could be that changes occur in the way that the graphite itself is used, or it could be other things start coming into play that we're not aware of. And we could sit here for hours going through various different technologies as what's being looked at, but it all comes down to power, safety, weight, cost, and all these key elements that you've got to find the right mix of all of them in terms of finding the process for that battery going forward.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We have a couple of more project-related questions. I think the first one, I've got two here. The first one I'm going to pick is from Paul Harry, and it's relating to the JORC report, the maiden JORC, which you're working on at the moment. And he's asked, when's this due? And also, as demand's so huge, are you reaching out yet to larger mining companies to sell the project plot, he says, but I guess it means Orom-Cross.
Yeah. I can't give you a definitive date, to be honest, and it's not because I'm dodging, Paul. It's because all of the labs the labs in South Africa and the labs in Canada, which are the two places where we've got work going on, are both subject to COVID restrictions at the moment. You'll appreciate that it's literally a changing landscape day by day, week by week. We heard last week that they're having to close down the labs in Canada every Friday and take literally a full cleaning crusade through there, and then they open up again on Monday morning. So you're taking one day's worth of work out of the system. So there are definitely some COVID related issues that we're facing. I would like to see the JORC resource coming out in the next 2 months maximum. And I think that, as I said in the presentation, we've got quite a lot of announcements that we can put up before that in terms of what the assays look like, which will give a flavour for where the JORC is going to go. So we are working as quickly as we can. We're speaking to these people all the time, but the world is a bit of a crazy place at the moment, so we've just got to take that into account, and you can't push people any harder than they're doing under these circumstances. People are locked down as well, so that doesn't help. But they're getting the work done, and it will get done. In terms of selling the project to third parties, it goes back to what I was saying a moment ago about not knowing what our end product looks like. I think it's fair to say that if our end product looks as good as we're hoping it will, and the mix of large flakes to smaller flakes, particularly if those sphericalize and we can show that they can be used into the battery market, will make us a very attractive proposition to anybody. The country is safe, as we've talked about. The project is going to be low cost. It can rapidly escalate and grow in size and scale to produce a lot more graphite than we were originally intending in terms of our initial 10-year mine life. So there is definitely advantages to anybody coming and having a look. We're not in a rush to do that. I think in terms of developing a project, you need to get out not just the JORC and the met test work, but you need to get out the studies that show what your product and project is going to deliver in terms of profit, in terms of cash flow, in terms of NPV, IRR, etc. So once those things start coming out and showing what value we've got, then anything's possible. But I've been doing this a long time. I've sold a lot of projects and a lot of companies along the way, and I've never gone out looking for that. I think what you do is you just keep your head down, you deliver, and you add value in your own project. And along the way, if you're doing a good job and you've got something of value in what's going to be a very hot market, there's a logical stance that says that somebody could come along and have a chat. But for now, we're certainly not talking to anybody.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Another question from Stuart Wallace in relation to CapEx. Have you any estimate needed to get to production of 30,000 tonnes? And how would you look at raising this, whether it be through shares or not? I know you touched upon you've yet to do the economic studies, but if you just go through the pathway to understanding those numbers first.
Well, the most critical part of understanding the CapEx numbers will be the plant. The two key areas where you're going to spend money is building your plant and your basic infrastructure to develop a mine, whether it be the actual mine itself or roads, water, electricity, etc. We have done some sort of initial studies in terms of understanding what a plant that can produce 25 to 35,000 tonnes would look like. Obviously, that's going to take some refining if we start having different branches that can deliver different end products. But generally, one can see that in the order of magnitude of around 40 to 50 million US dollars. And we want to have it set up in a way that one can just keep adding to it so that it's modular. And one can say, okay, we start at that point, but as the market, we saw that demand-supply imbalance graph, and as that starts to kick in, and suddenly year on year, we're starting to see demand falling way ahead of, supply falling well short of demand. We want to have the ability to quickly, be able to increase our supply coming from our particular project if we can. So initially, that sort of number, 30 to 50. Where do we get it from? Well, this is a very interesting part of the whole story because, again, when people talk about there being an awful lot of graphite around the world, it's not a product at the moment that's sold on an international market, and it's not sold forward, which means that everybody is working on spot contracts. And by not being able to sell forward, you can't necessarily or easily secure debt financing. Typically, for debt financing, they want to sell product forward and to lock it in so that they carry less risk, the debt provider. So by not being able to take inordinate amount of debt, that really means that a lot of projects will be hamstrung to the extent of either A, not getting into production at all, or B, having to start smaller and grow through different means of raising capital and obviously expanding plant, etc. from that. I would envisage that part of it will come from equity, and I would very much like to believe that as we get further down the line, we might be able to engage with an offtake partner and consider getting a prepayment of product through them in order to get the rest. That's a very efficient way of doing it because essentially the offtake partner is helping you get into production to deliver product into them. But it's early days. Certainly from my side, that sort of number 30 to 50 is a much smaller number than various other projects that one might be able to go into in other different types of metals and minerals. So it's reasonable and it's doable. And if we can get the company progressing the way we're hoping to, and we can get our share price moving up, it's possible to do it largely through equity without too much dilution as well. So we'll be looking at all different potential routes. I've done a lot of capital raising myself over the last 15 years. I've probably raised more than $300 million in various different projects. So I know where to look for it, and I know how to structure it. So we've got the expertise. We've just got to find out what our end product looks like, and then we can start the ball rolling.
Thank you, Mike. One more from Robert, more in relation to capital requirements over the next 12 months. And I think he's asking also, what do the capital requirements in relation to completion of the pre-feasibility study?
Yeah, we are very, very conscious of costs, and we want to make sure that we can deliver as much as we can for as little cash required. Sounds very obvious, and I'm sure everybody says it, but we do not want to be throwing big amounts of new cash and new capital into this company at the moment because it's more dilutive around about now, while our share price is obviously lower. Hopefully in the future it gets a lot higher and it's less dilutive and we can raise more. We envisage the total requirement to get to PFS and deliver that by the end of this year, around about £1 million, of which we've got most of that already from the capital raise that we've just done. And we would envisage seeing some of that warrant money coming through during the course of this year, or potentially a small capital raise at the back end of the year or later on in the year to make up the shortfall. But we've certainly got enough cash at this stage to progress forward.
Thanks, Mike. Just trying to go through potentially one on the political landscape and your views on the recent elections. The leader of Uganda is currently 76, and whether you think that there might be, in relation to the opposition leader being in house arrest. Any comments on?
Look, African politics is a difficult thing to comment on because. We grow up in Western democracies, and you understand what the right way and the wrong way is, and it's very difficult to sort of see the way they do it and understand it. But my own personal belief is that strong leaders, and Museveni is definitely one of those, are very important in terms of being able to progress forward as a country and for us in terms of our own mining project, because you have the continuity. You have the ability to speak to people and know where it's going. You get an opposition like Bobby Wine coming into power, and there would be an enormous amount of flummox and everybody not knowing what to do, and new ministers coming in and people with inexperience, and it all sorts of potential for chaos. So from our perspective, Museveni remaining in power is a good thing. We have a good relationship with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who happens to be the Member of Parliament for our particular area where our project is, and he's one of the leading politicians in the country, which is great, and he's promised support going forward. So I think we would like to just see as much stability as we can. I'm not going to go into whether democracy is a good or bad thing and whether somebody under house arrest or not is the right or the wrong thing, because not only could I get in trouble, but I think everybody will have a different view. So for us, continuity and stability are important, and that's certainly what Museveni will bring. And I think that will help us in terms of project development.
Thank you, Mike. I've got another question, a couple of questions in relation to processing and waste products and the environment. There are a few that have been said to me in direct message. So I think maybe if you could touch upon the processes used for Blencowe in producing the end graphite product and the measures you've taken to ensure that it's environmentally friendly, or another one, and how does it compare to, say, some of the other processes used by, say, some of the Chinese companies?
Look, we don't know what our end product looks like yet, so I don't have a definitive document that shows the process flow and ultimately shows how we're going to build the plant. That's still coming. That's one of the key outcomes of this phase 2 MET test work that we're doing. Make no mistake that any work that we do in terms of producing a concentrate will be done with the highest environmental concerns and work in mind. So we will make sure that it's all done in a friendly manner. We've already started the process of community liaison. In fact, as part of getting the 21-year mining license, which we already have in place, we had to agree a community payment in order to bring the community in and ensure that they're all going to be part of this process. So all those payments have been made. The community are on sides, friendly, and we want to make sure it goes on that way. So everything that we do going forward will be done to international standards. We don't foresee any problems there. It's very important, of course, that we're seen both at the local community level, but also at the international level as producing a clean product and being able to do it in a manner that's not going to cause any distress anywhere. So these standards are something that we've literally grown up doing in Australian companies and mining companies here all the time, and we take it for granted, and we certainly won't be doing it the way some of these Chinese companies do it. And it's not even up for grabs. We wouldn't even consider that. And certainly the experience that someone like Ian Waring's got as our COO will ensure that we get this done properly. And the consultants that we use will be international quality and caliber.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think I'm running out of questions now. You seem to have made quite a comprehensive overview of the graphite market and project plans at the moment. However, there was one private message to me about issuing from Matt to issue a program of events upcoming. So I think he's more focused on a list of the news flow, which is obviously very important for juniors in the London market. And yes. I did have a slide open, which has actually been open for a while, but maybe I could go back to that and you could talk us through things in a little bit more detail. Is that okay?
In terms of the work that's being done going forward in the news flow?
Yes. So we've got the JORC resource. So a little bit.
Well, let's take a step back. Where we are today is we're obviously working towards that JORC resource. That means that there's assay work going on in South Africa, and they're basically analysing the samples that we've sent them already. So some of that has already been done. And as I said, we'll be getting some announcements out on that in the very near term. And it's looking pretty good, I might say. So there's, in terms of the JORC resource, there's going to be a lot of news flow leading all the way through to that JORC resource. And then it's not to necessarily say that we won't take, there's going to be phase 2 work done in terms of the PFS that's going to require more drilling. So there's going to be more news flow in that regard going forward over the remainder of the year as well. The MET test work is probably the most critical part of this project, and that will determine what the quality of the end product looks like, how much we can end up selling it for, if we can sell it at all, and obviously the kind of economics that you get from what are your recovery rates, your flake sizes, etc. So as MET test results come through, we'll be able to get a lot of news flow relating to that. And ultimately, as both the JORC resource and the MET test work are done, we'll have a very clear picture of what this project looks like. And we will start flowing that already. We have already started the process of working through things like logistics, transport, infrastructure, power, and everything else that goes into the economic assessments, the studies, in order to understand what that PFS is going to look like. So again, a constant flow of news coming through over the second half of the year as we getting all this done. Well, actually, not even before the second half of the year, because we'll be getting the first of those out before that. And yeah, I think that one of the great things about a project like this is that there's a lot happening in different channels at all time. And I agree with you. I think that we want to keep in the face of the market. We're in a very, very hot market in general, but in particular for battery metal products at the moment. And we want to make sure that we are right in the face of the market at all times, and staying very relevant, and staying basically letting them know what we're doing and where we're going with this. So I think you'll probably say up to date, certainly over the last 9 months or whatever we've held this, that we've been quite active in terms of getting various podcasts out. When there's not necessarily news flow, we've got other things to talk about. There's a big macro market that's going on out there, which it's very important that we keep educating people and let them understand. It's not gold or copper or anything else which people are a little bit more familiar with. We need to be explaining what graphite's used for. I still go into meetings and people talk about pencils and tennis rackets. So we've got to keep telling them what it is that we're going to be producing, why it's so important, why it's leveraged into that massive growth in the EV market in particular, and explain how we're going to join the dots, basically, how we're going to get from A to B to C to D, and ultimately have something of incredible value.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Look, I think you've been talking for pretty much an hour now, so you've ended up by giving an outline of news flow. But potentially we can expand on any feedback you might want to give us from this. This is our, it's an introductory public presentation, and we've had 50 people on this call. So at one point, do feel free to email into the company. The addresses should be at the end of the presentation, which is available on the website. And we'll we are recording this, so I'll add a link to this, which we'll also put on the website and out from the Twitter account as well. So,
good. Thank you, Sasha. I mean, from my side, I'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time to listen in. It's great to see a few of the faces on some of the little pictures that I can see here, and no doubt we'll hopefully be speaking to some of each other going forward in terms of as we progress this project. But it's great to be able to just chat about it. You can probably hear from my voice I'm quite passionate about it. I've got a lot of belief in where this market's going and what our project can deliver. But I'm always happy to take calls or emails or anything. So whether that comes via you or directly, feel free, and we'll see. Obviously, if we can get responses back, we will. And just keep watching, because there's going to be a lot happening in this particular space and in this particular company going forward. And hopefully it's going to continue to be as exciting as it's currently proving to be.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Good. All right. Well, with that, I'll probably say thank you and goodbye. It's certainly later in the day where I am, but early where you are, and hope everyone has a good week and stay safe. And we'll speak soon.